next group we're going to cover is phylum Mollusca. Phylum Mollusca, which means soft body, are coelomates. They're in the bilateral, they're bilateral. They're soft bodies with large or hard shells on the outside, things like snails, oysters. Even octopus are part of this group, although, they're kind of advanced and they have some special features, and we'll look at those in the lab. There are 5 major features to this group. They have what is known as a muscular foot, and a visceral mass, a mantle cavity, and a radula. Let's look at what those look like. Okay, so if we were looking at this, this is a figure that's in your book. The visceral mass is just talking about like the main body part, which would be underneath the shell. And there's usually a lining to the shell called the mantle cavity, which is enclosing all of the organs, including some of the ways that the organs are entering into the outside or entering into the body, so like in or out. These guys are coelomates, so they actually have a body cavity that is in between, that has the organs that are sort of inside of this body cavity. And they have this is what is known as the head foot. So this is modified depending on what kind of organism we're looking at. And usually there's some kind of head ganglia that is associated with the mouth and head region, and then some nerve cords that are running along, oftentimes lateral. And in the mouth, it has this kind of a rasping organ, sort of like teeth. And this is called a radula, where, like in a snail, for example, they can scrape off algae and so forth from their surface. So most of then what we've talked about, so again, it has a shell, it has a mantle, which is like enclosing the visceral mass, which is like all the organs and stuff. It has a head-foot region, and then it has the radula. Those are the features of this group. Let's see what else. Let's look at this. So this is a clam. This has a similar, a similar look to it, but slightly different the way that the orientation is. So this is like the foot part. So head foot. It doesn't really have a head in this case, but it does have a front region. This is the mouth, and it of course has the coelom, the same kind of features as before. In this case, it has gills. Because it's in the water, and so it would be taking in oxygen from the water and getting rid of CO2 via that way. Here's its shell. It has like a mantle that is holding all the viscera within it. And if you've ever eaten clams or oysters, you might have noticed that little extra piece of material that is underneath the part that you normally eat. All right. And then some other things that occur in this group is something called torsion. Oops, I'm really sorry. Is meaning that the body, so it has a front region, and then depending on how the body is oriented, it actually twists around, and the back region is like towards the front. So this is called torsion. You'll see this also in the scuttlefish that we look at in the lab, or squid that we look at in the lab. They have a body torsion as well. All right, so I'm gonna just put this one back up here for a second. So like I was talking about it, they do have a brain area, at least, or a front area. Some of them very advanced, like the octopus is got a fairly large brain, and some of them even have eyes. The octopus is one of them. The eyes on an octopus are actually kind of complex, and they have what is known as metanephridia. So again, these are like the flame cells. These are in the fluids of the body, and they will collect the nitrogen waste and transport it to the outside. If they're aquatic, they will have a gill. If they're not, they may have some other organ for getting oxygen in and out of the oxygen in and CO2 out of the body, and it's transported through vessels and pumped with a heart into the body fluids. So this is what is known as a open circulatory system, because the body fluids are just kind of in this tube. They don't go in a circle. They basically are just like in the tube and get flowed back and forth, sort of, and the heart pumps it, kind of squishes it in both directions. And yeah, anyway, it's not a closed system. And the gonads are also in this coelomic region. Let's see what else. The gut, of course, has some specialized areas along it, in particular a stomach. What we mean by specialized areas is in the mouth, you're processing the food, you pass it down to the stomach, then through the intestines. So as you do that, or as you have areas for particular functions within the system, that's called a specialization. And we'll look at that some more. And all of these things, so the anus, of course, that is getting rid of digestive waste, is coming out here into the mantle cavity. The gonads would empty into the mantle cavity for the reproductive effort. The gills are also in the mantle cavity for collecting oxygen and getting rid of CO2. And so those are the kind of main things that would be looked at, processed here. And then, let's see, they do have separate male and females usually. Some snails are hermaphroditic, but most are have separate male and females. And they have the trochophore larva that I showed you before. All right, so, and then let's just go over the groups. So these are the kind of the different classes. There are actually 8 classes. These are just some examples of the classes. So these are kind of some big ones that you may know. Some of you might know chitons, which are kind of a marine organism. They're fairly large, and Polyplycophora. And then gastropoda are the snails and slugs, which you probably know about, of course. Some of them are on land. And then you have bivalves, or bivalvia, which are clams, mussels, scallops, the oysters, etc. And most of you, if you've lived in Florida, have some experience with those. And cephalopoda, which are the squids, octopus, cuttlefish, chambered nautilus, and these are marine. We'll be looking at cephalopoda a little bit more when we dissect things in the lab. All right. So the next group is Annelida. Annelida are segmented worms. These are earthworms. Most of you have seen these before. The Annelida means little ring. They can be anywhere from 1 millimeter to 3 meters long, so they can be pretty small or very large. They're in moist soil or aquatic. They do have an alimentary canal like the last group. That means, one-way digestive in the mouth, out the anus, with specializations, just like we were talking about before. And they also have metanephridia being like flame cells, picking up nitrogenous waste from the body fluids and exporting it to the outside. What's different about these guys, and it's kind of amazing when you look at them and you say, this is a worm, right? But they have actually cerebral ganglia and ventral nerve cords, which is a slightly more advanced. And let's see, I'm trying to find there we go. So it's slightly more advanced, so they'll have a definite front area here. And they also have a closed circulatory system with 5 parts. So in other words, they actually have a dorsal and ventral vessels that are transporting oxygen from picking up from respiration mainly from the outside, from their skin, and getting rid of CO2, but they're carrying that around the body to the body segments. And they're also picking up nitrogenous wastes, which are transported out via the metanephridia. and they are also carrying food molecules from the digestive tract throughout the body. So that's typical of a circulatory system. This is the first time we've seen a closed circulatory system. And the other thing, let's see, like I said, they have specializations along their gut. So they have a mouth. They actually have a pharynx, which is kind of like a region just, for passage. They have an esophagus, a crop, which is kind of helping, crop end, a gizzard sort of helps digest food. It's kind of like specializations of the stomach. It kind of, because they're eating a lot of plant material, they have to kind of break it up in different ways here along the digestive tract, and then it gets passed out, down the intestines and out the anus, all right? Each of the segments has actually what they call setae, and some of these groups have, really large ones, and the number of them and so forth can kind of separate the different groups. They can move fairly well. They have longitudinal muscles that act around the central coelom, which in this case acts kind of like what they call a hydrostatic skeleton. And these guys also, they will slough off their external material and replace it. And you might have heard of worm castings or something. Anyway, it has a chitin in it, which has a nitrogen product, and that's why they're good for soil. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that before, but it's kind of a cool thing. And okay, so the two groups that are two classes are Errantia, which means traveling, and these guys are usually predators, and then Sedentaria, which are burrowers, things like leeches or earthworms. Now these are the old groupings. I'm just going to show you some of these, like some of the classes. So the old groupings, like the polychaetes, would have been the Errantia. So these are kind of like the slower ones. And then these two are really more what we would call the Sedentaria. So these are segmented worms, the typical ones that you see in the marine, and then these are the leeches. So these are like earthworms and so forth. Anyway. So you can see these traveling worms, they have these setae that are kind of big, and that helps them move along the marine floor fairly easily. All right. So just one last thing before we go away from here. So we have been talking about these guys right here, oops, I'm sorry, wrong place, Annelida and Mollusca, so these groups right here. And the next thing we're going to talk about are these groups over here. So kind of check that out. If you look at it on the, so this is in Appendix E. And if you look at it sort of on a larger scale, we just finished the Lophotrochozoa. And now we're going to talk about the Ecdysozoa. I'm horrible at saying these. Anyway, these guys, what that's referring to is it has an outside skeleton that it will actually lose. And so these groups are going to be the nematodes and the arthropods. So that's the next thing we're covering.